Welcome to the Edges of Facilitation. In this series, we're exploring what facilitation is, what it isn't, by comparing it with sister practices, some of which overlap, some of which get mistaken for facilitation, and all of which have something to teach facilitators. I'm keen to do this series because I really want to explore ways in which facilitators can stretch and grow or set boundaries for themselves if that's something that they don't want to do, and understand what's really being asked of them or what's possible with a group when we explore different ways of doing things, even if we're not using the same words for things, because there aren't universal definitions for any of the terms that we use in this series. And that is a word of warning that there is a hefty dose of subjectivity in everything that we are about to talk about. But my hope is that by reflecting on our craft, it helps us to deepen whatever practice it is that we are in. My name is Lucy Chambers. I'm a facilitator based in Berlin, and my guest today is Maria Scordialos, and we are going to be talking about facilitation versus, and I'm setting it up as a binary, hosting conversations that matter. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Good morning.
Wonderful. I'm very excited about this conversation. I've been wanting to have it for a really long time. Just to get us into it, for people that don't know you, in a few words, give a flavor of what you do.
Thank you for the few words, because we could take the whole podcast just on that. Firstly, I'd like to say who I am. I am a Greek woman. I live in Greece, and the work that I do in the world is in many different parts of the world, supporting people to really create clarity on what they're doing, finding ways forward in very complex and unprecedented times, and supporting people to kind of grow, develop new worldviews, new ways in which we can really see life and then participate and relate to it.
Amazing. So Maria and I met at an art of hosting training in Berlin, and I'd been wanting to kind of pick her brain about some of the things that I experienced during that particular moment that we had together for a really long time, and I was finally brave enough to reach out and ask her. This is a broader conversation than that. So this is about hosting conversations in general, but we will maybe talk a little bit about art of hosting, because I think it might be an entry point for some people to see this type of work, particularly if you've come from different flavors of facilitation or hosting or whatever it is that you call yourself that you do. For people who haven't experienced it, and I know you're a co-initiator of this kind of, I don't know if it's what the best word is to call it, set of practices or community, or I think it's all of the above. How would you give people a little bit of a flavor if they haven't experienced that?
It's a question that I was in 20 plus years ago as well. Like, what's the difference between facilitation and then as we co-initiated and co-created, which was really through a process of being learners ourselves. The best way that I describe hosting is it's about creating conditions. It's creating the conditions for those that are going to be participating, those that are coming together, those that are seeking maybe new ways, new potential, to actually have the greatest amount of potential for them to find ways forward. So we create the conditions for people to find the way forward. We don't focus on what is the way forward and then create a setting and facilitate them to that. Yes. So a big part of hosting is working with not knowing, but it's creating those anchor points, those containers, those conditions that might invite the best potential.
Mm-hmm. That was certainly one of the things that I experienced quite viscerally when we were together. I noticed how much in a lot of the other work that I do have a theory of how we're going to get a group to a particular decision or something that the group all needs to arrive at together at the end of our time together. And it struck me very strongly in this hosting experience that we had, how much was let to individual participants to decide. So I think there were some things that we were all experiencing together, and a lot of it felt very, very personal to me. And I'm pretty sure that there were parts of it that nobody else experienced apart from me. Is that something that comes up?
And this comes, what I'm going to speak now actually comes from my Living Wholeness Institute work, which was kind of standing on the shoulders of the art of hosting. And I took it further with two wonderful women, Vanessa Reed from Canada and Sarah Whiteley from the United Kingdom, is that when you create conditions for potential and for people that are in that together, you have to work with both the individual and the collective. Sometimes with facilitation, people put too much of a focus on the collective because we're facilitating a collective understanding, clarity, decisions, whatever. And we forget that there needs to be space for that diversity. You cannot have collective without diversity. In a natural system, in an ecosystem, everything happens with that diversity. So you need to allow as much space for people to have their individual sharing, understanding, knowledge, transformation, inner or outer, as you do the collective. You cannot have collective intelligence emerge if you just focus on collective, because that requires people to let go of themselves. And that's when we have conflict and we have people feeling like they're outside of it. Likewise, you cannot just work with the visible. You cannot only work with what we already know. You also have to work, and my hands are doing this thing like this. You also have to work with what we do not know, because that's where potential is. You have to work with giving space to not knowing and feeling some of that inner chaos of not knowing, which in a lot of our settings, we have a huge fear of not knowing. So we keep doing same old, when it's destroying us. It's destroying our earth. It's destroying ourselves as a species, etc. But we're so afraid to say we don't know. We need to find a new way. And so as much as you give space to the individual and to the collective, you have to give space to what I know and what is visible and what works, and also what we don't know, and allowing that invisible to also speak to us and create greater intelligence. When you hold those four elements together, then collective intelligence can work, which is actually why we facilitate or host. I don't really care which word we want to use, because I'm not stuck on words and I'm not stuck into the binary, this or that. It's all.
I have set it up as a binary mainly to be provocative, but I 100% do not believe that this is a binary. But that's the way that we've named the series. And yeah, some of the things that we've discussed, I think there are kind of firm lines that you can draw between one thing and the other, but this doesn't feel like one of them. It feels very much like an expansion, but possibly also a difference in worldview in terms of what we believe about how groups achieve things, or what we think is possible and what we think our role is as the person who is either hosting or facilitating a group. And I know that you've got a lot of things that you can probably add to that, so I'm just going to shut up and let you talk about it.
In my journey of working with people and trying to find the right way to create these conditions, it really led me very early on in doing this work. And I would suggest this for people that are entering into this line of work, that they really read into the worldview element and look at and explore a living systems worldview, because the approach of hosting is very much based on a living systems perspective of life. Most of us in the Western world are educated and trained in what is known as a mechanistic, linear, or rational perspective of life. This comes from, it's a very European-centric way, which it came from the scientific revolution, which brought so much positive things in our lives. So there's no There's no, again, wanting to go into a binary, that was bad and this is good, and that kind of a stuff. What happened with the scientific revolution, with people such as Descartes, the Cartesian way of thinking, was that there was a separation of the mind from the body. That began a worldview of fragmentation. And most of our world is based on a mechanistic worldview. This is the dominant worldview. What does that mean in simple terms? Most of us are trained and educated to see life in terms of problem. You isolate a problem, you see the problem, and then you break that problem down, you fragment it into smaller pieces, and you isolate where the problem is, and you tinker with that, and then you fix it. I'm making this very simplistic. What that means is that we have created systems that are siloed and are broken down. So in our education systems, we have different disciplines that we study. I'm an engineer, or I'm an architect, or I'm a psychologist. So we've let go of a holistic to go into that fragmented, and to be we also go into a cause and effect way of thinking. There's a cause, and A goes to B, and that creates C. Mm-hmm. That is too simplistic. That is not the way life works. And the new sciences, and there's a lot that people can read into, from quantum physics to complexity science, chaos theory, organismic biology, evolutionary biology, etc., which gave us a very new and yet also very ancient view of life. And this is, for me, captured in a living systems perspective. It is based on natural systems and how ecosystems work. And we humans are nature. We are not separated from nature. Again, this rationalistic worldview separated the humans out, made us the top of the pyramid, made us the ones that are clever and we can control the world. And this is a very important word, control rather than relate. Mm-hmm. And so what we have is a world where we try to dominate life rather than live with life and relate to life. Now, this also gets taken from that macro into a room when you're actually working with a group of people. If I am working from a mechanistic worldview, and by the way, worldviews, we are often unconscious of our worldview, because a worldview is a set of practices, values, perceptions that form a truth. It's based on a set of assumptions, and those truths we forget, but we think they're the only way. And this is also why we are getting a more and more polarized view of life, and we're seeing more polarization of you're right and I'm right and you're wrong, and etc., that's going on, which is leading to the conflicts, the wars, and the horrificness that we're seeing in our world. But in a room, when you walk in and you are the person that has been entrusted, because I want to use that word, when you facilitate or host, people are actually putting trust in you, and you are leading a group. So it's a job with a lot of responsibility. And if you are a person that has not checked into your worldview and you don't really know where you're operating from, because this is part of that, your being state, who you are, you don't understand the foundation that it stands on, you will invariably do things that you don't realize will have an impact on people. So if you come primarily from a mechanistic worldview, you will enter into working with people by looking at the problem, not the potential. When you work from a living systems worldview, you seek potential. You seek, where does this group of people want to create collective meaning? What will assist them to do that? What are the questions we need to offer them for people to start sharing what they care about? Yeah. I'm going to use a strong word, what they love, what they want to change in the world, and what they want to make better. Not because it's a problem, but because it's here and we want to surface it. We want to work with it. So the worldview is really important. If you do this work, please take time to become aware of both, how do you think? The way you perceive and how you think shapes what you do, and it also shapes who you are. So make sure you take time to look into that. Not an easy thing to do. And for some of us that are really seeped into the mechanistic world, might be listening to me and going, oh God, this woman is into all this weird stuff that I have to go into my inner world and do all of this, that, and the other. Yes and no. It depends on who you are. You might find some of that from the outer world and reflect, or you might find it from your inner world. The important practice or the important capacity, whatever language you want to use, that you need to work with is reflection and understanding. You cannot host or facilitate or lead groups if you don't understand yourself. And this is
100.
core to what you do.
100%. There are so many things so many directions that I want to take it in from various things that you've just said. Maybe I'll just quickly reflect something that came up for me while you were talking. I think one of the other things that I've kind of had reflected back at me in the 15 plus years that I've been in the world of facilitation is my understanding of what my role is. So when I was very young and starting out, I really thought that it was my job to design an experience and work out what was best for the group. And I think some of the things I've experienced being around people who do more hosting is very much that I am not the expert in somebody else's experience, and I can bring all kinds of tools to maybe help them see something, maybe something fresh that they haven't seen before. But at the end of the day, they know best what they're going to get out of it. And yeah, I was struck by the level to which it wasn't direct, like the hosting experience wasn't directed. It was allowed to be what it needed to be. I'll happily let you reflect that. Maybe I can throw in a question while, and we'll do two at the same time. The other thing that I've been on a bit of a journey with is the role of conversations and the role of stories in facilitation, hosting, wherever we're placing ourselves in this wonderful chaotic world. And actually, I actually did a training course that told me not to put conversations into facilitated workshops, and I actually followed that advice for a couple of years. My first few years working in this field, and I just felt like there was something missing. And I've, through art of hosting and through actually other things, other facilitated methodologies, learned why some of my sessions in the early days were feeling a bit naked. And it does feel like there's a depth that you can get to with a well containered conversation. Maybe let's call it that. I don't want to sound like we're constricting it, but a well-enabled conversation that felt like it was missing. And I just wonder if you could say something, because I do think that the leading conversations is part of a skill set.
So I'll just start with the first piece that you said and say a little bit on experience too. My early days, I actually worked in local government in the United Kingdom, and I ended up, I don't know how this happened, but I ended up working a lot. It was in a training unit, and ended up working a lot with social services. And social services, as we know, works with people, both adults, older people, and also children, often who have faced abuse and very difficult situations and might be removed from their kind of nuclear family. And so the people that work in those situations are dealing with complex, which are very interrelated issues that you cannot see that cause and effect. I'm just giving a simple definition to how I work with complexity. There's an unpredictability that comes from that interplay between different elements. And what I felt in my early days was that I was working with people were holding a lot of emotion, a lot of stress. They had seen things that we really don't want to see. And that I felt when I was facilitating a team day or a group of people that were working with things, sometimes there was conflict in the group, because when you can't release what you're seeing, you start fighting with each other. And I thought that what I needed to do as the facilitator was to be the person, to be the conduit in the center that was leading the group, where everything was going through me, and I was doing my best to reflect back what they were saying or what they were, and kind of take that huge responsibility of trying to bring together what they were trying to say, or the clarity that was coming. Number one, it was exhausting because I was the center, right? And secondly, however fantastic I am and wanting to reflect stuff back, I filter things. We are not, as human beings, we have judgment, whether we like it or not. We might not be judgmental of everything, but we do filter things. So I wasn't giving them the space themselves to co-create that meaning between them. I then started to notice that this was not going to work. And that was part of my journey of entering and becoming a co-initiator of the art of hosting, because I wanted to learn how to create space for people to actually not be in the center, but you create the space and then you get out of the way. And what I encountered was this terrible fear inside me that if I did that, I'm going to lose control. Mm-hmm. And people are not going to be able to do this for themselves. And anyway, what's my value? Why am I there? I'm valuable if I'm the clever one, if I'm the one that can very, wonderfully express what the group is. So I had a huge kind of existential crisis of who I am if I'm not in the center. So one of the ways that I explain the difference between facilitation and hosting is when you're that person doing that work, you just get yourself out of the way. When you host, you get out of the way.
Yeah.
But you still have to give structure. In order for potential to emerge, for emergence, another great word that we work with. Emergence is a new arising, something that we didn't even dream possible emerges, comes through. And that's when we have those aha moments. That's when we know that we've got potential that we might be able to manifest and move into a practical and implementable space. In order to have emergence, and this is part of this work, it's working with paradox, working with the opposites. In order to have emergence, you need structure. So in hosting, what is the structure? The first part of structure is clarity of purpose. When you're working with people, before you start working with them, ask them, why do you need to do this? And what are you working towards? Not what is the outcome you want, but what are you working towards? What do you dream possible? What do you hope will happen as a result of this? That is the first structure, purpose. The second structure is translating that purpose into a set of questions, often open questions that allow people to come and share from what they know. None of us are greenfield sites. We all stand on experience. This comes from grounded theory, and you can go and look into that. We all come from something, and the vehicle for capturing and creating that from being a tacit knowledge to being an explicit knowledge is often asking people to share their story or share their experience. If you feel you're working in context that the word story will be seen as something that you tell children, that you don't do it in a boardroom or in the Security Council of the United Nations or whatever. So you invite people to share experiences. You invite people basically to share their knowledge. When you do that, people immediately start owning the space. And that is part of why you get out of the center as a facilitator and become a host. Why? Because you want people to own and have meaning and commit. When you get those things, then you have implementation is much easier. When you don't have it, you have a lot of conflict. So as I gave you 3: purpose, and I gave you questions. Sorry, I didn't give you 3. I gave you 2. You give questions. And then the third one is you find conversational methods or conversational ways. And there are many tools in which you can do that, right? Where, again, be careful that you're not over structuring that. I mean, how many of us have gone to meetings where you have a facilitator that asks them to do a million things with Post-its, and they're actually leading you? They're not leading you. They are asking you to do something they want to hear at the end of it, or your client wants to hear at the end of it. There's no space for that surprise, for that awe, for that magic in the middle to emerge, to come through, and to make a difference that none of us thought would be possible. So those 3 things, if I want to say, are anchor points of structure for hosting without needing to over control. And of course, the 4th, and this is the most important, is working with your own fear of letting go and your own attachment to control. We hate being controlled, but we have no problem controlling others. So you have to work with that. So that's the first piece, and I got a little lost in that. So just asking you the second piece, you asked me something else that
it was you covered it actually anyway. So I was asking you about the role of story and conversation. So
thank you.
I knew you would take
I
us.
wove it together. Whoa. Okay.
Weaving was the other theme that came out.
That's a core. That's what you do as a host. You really are a weaver, but you're not. And what does a weaver do? The weaver puts is it called the warp? I always forget the first bit, and then the weft is what the group does. So the creating the conditions is putting just the basic structure, and then the weaving the actual group does. And what you're doing as a host is being really present and watching what is that tapestry or what is that weave that's emerging. I just want to say one thing is that as a host, if you take this approach of creating conditions, you must be prepared that in many contexts, we are so conditioned to work with control, right? And to work with breaking things down, that when you invite it in, you might get pushback from the people that you're working with. And you need to be ready for this. And this is one thing that we say in the art of hosting world is this is why we never host alone. We are rarely in that position on our own. One, because it shows by example that leadership has to be collective. But secondly, because it's very complex and one person cannot hold that complexity. That's why the one leader solution in our world is really, really warped and is part of the problem that we're all still waiting for the one leader to come, I don't know from where, and deliver us the solutions, But I wanted to say that as a person that wants to take this less central, less over-guided, and even less controlled approach to working with groups, you need to be ready to get their confusion. I don't know if you experienced that, Lucy, at the training, but I saw a lot of people in that training confused and thinking there was a problem with the training without them realizing that it's just a different approach. We're inviting you to co-invest in this training. We're not just going to deliver everything to you. We want you to take it and make it your own. But many of us are not conditioned to do that. We are not taught to participate. Because although we use the word, we live in democracies, we don't. We're very, very, we're taught to live in our own little worlds and not into a co-related one.
Yeah. That sounds, there are so many of the things that you just mentioned that strike me from my own journey from learning not to overstructure things. I definitely did that in the early days, learning to leave space for things that will not fit on a Post-it note. I love Post-it notes, but I also have a difficult relationship with them at this point in my journey. Just I think the other word that was coming up for me was humility. It's just, yeah, like I very much, I still do have an ego, but yeah, just really understanding that it is not my role to be the expert. I do not know better than the people in the room. Yeah, it was a journey, and so I feel like that's a thing. I'm happy that I've arrived at this point. I've still got work to do, but maybe it's a natural transition anyway to the so I usually ask about skill set and tool set, so how people develop into this world. Obviously you can go to experience art of hosting, you can take a training. Is there anything that you would kind of call out as a particular thing that is worth working on, and how do people develop that?
Maybe picking up the thread of humility, or another way of putting it is the seeing that our value is not on what we know or the clever things we change in a group, but being of service.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I would say, and this is core to the art of hosting, but I would say that this has been a guiding part of my life. And I can only speak from my experience, because I can't say that this is the truth. It's my truth. Really embrace being a learner,
Mm-hmm.
a lifelong learner, that we are always, because learning and evolving are totally intertwined. And we are always in a state of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
We are not just one thing. And you use the word ego. If you look at the ego and the unconscious from a Jungian perspective, what you find is the ego is the known self. And if you're attached only to what you know, and you don't then understand that you're actually swimming, that known is swimming in a massive pool of potential, you will only stay with the known, and then you will stay stuck with what you are. But if you learn, and you learn the practice of learning, it's not so, we're all educated, but we're not taught to learn. We're taught to regurgitate what we're told. So you become a learner, and you become curious, and you prototype, and you experiment, and you try things out. And if something fails, you go, aha, felt horrible, but I've learned something from that. Invest in learning, invest in your own learning. And with the learning, invest in reflecting. You cannot learn if you don't digest, if you don't bring it back. The other, and this is all part of this, is don't just learn outward, learn inward. We all have practices that help us to be in relationship with ourselves. Running in the morning gives that quiet time to just be in movement with myself and to feel my feet on the ground. Knitting might be my practice, because it slows my brain waves and it takes me into something. Meditation might be my practice, or yoga. I would say that it's often we stay focused on what we're doing and not what it does to us. So
Mm-hmm.
as a practitioner, become aware of the practices that you're doing, not only mastering what you're doing, but what is happening to your inner world and to yourself. To work as a host, this humility, this service, you really, really have to know about hosting yourself. We call that hosting yourself, and then you can host others. And then, of course, you can learn many different tools and techniques that you can use. But the main instrument, the main technique, the main thing is you. Your presence by walking in a room can shift. The way you speak to a group, the way you invite them to share who they are, what they care about, can absolutely open the door to that potential. The more you're so consumed with yourself, and if you're performing well, and if you're being perceived so wonderful, and this, that, and the other, well, just lock yourself in a room and be with yourself, quite honestly, because that's what you're doing, even with a group. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
Yeah, answering
it's
wonderfully.
absolutely. And I'm not saying that we should all go to psychotherapy for 35 years, and because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being a practitioner and learning. And I'm talking about seeing life as a journey. One that is not just about us getting to one thing and then sticking with that, but allowing, because often when we have our breakdowns, when we have our crisis moments, it's because something's opening inside us and we want something new, and it's potential knocking on our door going, hello, there's more of you, there's more, come. So they're not negative moments in our lives, they're very, very fruitful moments in our lives. But do we try to control them and break them down and make them good, or do we unfold, embrace, become curious?
I wish I'd been given that advice 15 years ago. I think I would have said, well, I don't know, maybe you've got to go through, maybe you've got to go through this, maybe you've got to go through the journey of thinking that
Right.
this is about you. And I'm a lot more chill as both a facilitator and a host now, I think, recognizing that I am not the star of the show. There are so many things that I would love to ask you. There's all kinds of interesting language things, but maybe I would ask if we could pick those up another time, because I know that you're throughout the art of hosting training. There are all kinds of things that you were mentioning about, like references from Greek, where maybe we don't have words for some of the concepts in English that are quite central to hosting. But yeah, maybe I could invite you a second time and we can like really get nerdy about Greek.
Yes. And I mean, there is any approach, because you were looking for a word earlier for the art of hosting. It's an approach, it's a pattern.
That's a great word.
And people that gather around that, you do create a language set. And there is also a mastery to knowing which language to use where, because one of the anchor points I didn't mention is context. Context is everything. And if you go in and you use language that context does not understand, it can really put up barriers. And people think you're some kind of hippie, woo-woo, whatever. And at the same time, it's a fine line. You have to be careful that you don't just use the language that might tip you into the very mechanistic world that doesn't then give opening to the potential. So part of the mastery of doing this work is knowing which language to use, right? Do I use the word implement versus flow in a particular place? Do I use the word harvest, or do I use the word capturing the knowledge we have created together? They're different. It doesn't matter what language we use. We're not here to become kind of gurus of a language. We're here to support people to find the best possible way forward. But it's an important part.
It's an important part. Yes, I will. I will try and convince Maria to come back and tell me about all of the terms that we used in the session that kind of blew my mind and definitely expanded some of the things that English puts a cage on. Maybe I can ask you, because I'm just looking at the time, Maria. Maybe I can ask you one final question, which is maybe a controversial one. Where is hosting not the right answer? Like, where would you not host, and where would you maybe advise that somebody takes a different approach?
I think it's not so much where it's not applicable, but it's how it's done. Because this is all, it's just like life. It's there's shades of it. There's a spectrum of it. I would say, and this is a really big area that I am exploring at the moment, so this is very close to my heart. As I see our world order disintegrating into disorder, and we are seeing the horrificness of what that means. We are seeing many of our civil liberties being taken away. We are seeing wars. We are seeing famines. We are seeing people being taken from their lands. many, many things that we are seeing. You can't structure in those situations. They're extreme situations. So the question I'm holding is, we are in a time of breakdown. How do you host in that?
Mm-hmm.
That's a question I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been in emergency situations, both a climate storm, and I've lived through the horrificness of the Greek crisis. I put those in quotes. What I see is that in us humans, we have a natural capacity to go quickly into relationship. And that becomes the hosting.
Mm-hmm.
We help each other, literally. We support one another. We save one another. It's an intrinsic human capacity to want to support life to continue. So we, of course, also, if we're starving, might kill each other to take the food that we need, which is what's happening in places like Gaza. But I think it's a different kind of hosting. It's a hosting that comes from our instinct rather than a hosting that we structure.
Yeah.
So I think it's not about hosting not being applicable, but it's about even more letting go of structure and more letting go and more surrendering to the instinct that is in us to make sure that life continues. And I guess this is why it's really important, if I move my perspective to the climate crisis, it's so important that we should be working on prevention and on readiness. We need to be ready, because if I know my land like I do here, because I farm and I've been here 19 years and I've been in deep relationship. When a flood hit us 3 years ago, I knew exactly where to go to save myself.
Mm-hmm.
So where we need to be putting our attention right now in any system is building relationship and being ready when the unknown thing that hits us, we can actually move very fast.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different kind of hosting than looking for the potential that's coming. It's looking to the response and the resilience that we need to have built inside us to be able, because our weather patterns are unraveling and they will continue to unravel with the Anthropocene. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question again, but that's the way I answer it.
Every answer is the only answer that could be, I think, is a riff on the open space answers. Yes. One thing that was a quote that was popping to head while you were talking about that is a Brené Brown quote about people are hard to hate, close up, move in. And I feel like this relationship and like being in relationship with people and the world around us. A lot of the things that I feel like we sometimes miss when we're facilitating and we're trying to move through things at a pace is we just don't leave space to work out how we relate to other people and the world around us. And the final question that I think I was grappling with when we met, and I'm still grappling with, is how to blend, and maybe this is where we fully break the we fully break the binary that I falsely set up for us at the beginning. It feels to me like there is a space for space and space for I'm going to call them decisions. And when I think of decisions, I think of myself in facilitation mode, where we're trying to like close something, we're trying to move something forward. And hosting, I see a lot more as sense making, as working out how to see what we don't know, how to understand different perspectives, how to understand wisdom that is not yet part of us. And I wonder how you see those things, if I've set that up in an entirely weird way in my head, or if that's fair.
So maybe to check my own understanding, as I was listening to you speak, what was coming to me was me being offered a piece of work where people would like to come to some kind of conclusions by the end of the time that I'm working with them.
Yes. Exactly.
And I getting very nervous because you see that the group is not getting to that place of convergence. We call it convergence. they are still in the soup of not knowing and not yet ready to get to a place of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to get very, very caught up with oneself and think, oh my God, I'm not going to deliver what I said on my proposal. And they're going to think I'm not good at this job. And this is where you need to have courage. And you need to say and to be clear. And we always, when working with a group, there are areas that they have gotten clarity. Are you able, and do you have the skill set to be able to discern? Let me give you that word, the discernment, where a group has begun to have clarity. You have clarity on this, right? And here you don't yet have clarity.
Mm-hmm.
You need to keep working. This is where you need to keep working. Now, we didn't know we were going to get to this point. We didn't know that we were going to have this and then we were going to have this unclarity. So we cannot conclude to make a decision to move forward, but we can talk about how we move forward. So it's the how, not the what.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a host, what you do is you work with them in whatever remaining time you have, even maybe after working with them, to support them to see a process,
Mm-hmm.
the journey to continue, which might include you or might not include you.
Yeah.
Right. And so you also need to make sure that you don't get caught up, that you need to be there. You have to be the person that gets them to the conclusion. Maybe they don't need you and they can continue. So the thing is to work with what is there rather than what you thought it should be or what the client thought it should be. But it needs to be what is. Now, what can often happen is when you are able to show people that we've gotten this far and we're clear here, immediately their nervous systems start to reduce because they're not thinking that they haven't done any work. And then when we're saying we don't yet know this, but you know what, let's just think of how you can continue and let's take a rest, let's digest, sleep on it, move forward. And maybe we need another meeting, or maybe is there a smaller group that wants to take this and make some more sense of it? And you come back and work on it. That is still a conclusion, but it's a process conclusion, not a content conclusion.
Yeah.
So again, as the person working with the process, you need to also navigate between the content and the process.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, again, if I picked up what you were saying correctly,
Yeah.
but if you try to converge something that is not meaningful to a group, but that you think you need to do that because the client, the manager, the director, the whoever, or whoever else is not going to think that you've done a good job, you're really not doing a good job. You need to say things as they are, however discomfort it is for you or disruptive it is for them. They need that disruption. That's part of their process.
That's amazing, Maria. Wise words. I think that's an amazing place to end, unless you think that there's something that I should have asked you that I didn't.
My only place to end is to say thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for offering this. It's really, really important. So.
Thank you for accepting. I am very grateful that you said yes. I would love to talk to you for another hour. Maybe I can convince you to come back and we can do the really nerdy language stuff. But Maria, where would you like me to point people to on the internet to find more about your work? And
sure. So there's my website, mariascordialos.com. That's my kind of consulting, but the place of my heart and my soul, and it's just being developed. And it's really hard to write it in English because it's a Greek word. Achladiza is I'm really setting up this farm because I also farm it's always been a place of learning. And I'm just developing the website, achladiza.com. Hopefully it can be written so people can see it. And it'll be probably, it'll be out there in the month of September. And it's a place where we're going to be offering learning like this for people that are already on their journey and want to deepen into practice, and especially practice on themselves and learn with other people and learn with nature, because this is a very remote part of Greece, a very beautiful part of Greece. And we live in a living system. So you cannot not learn that worldview by being here. Those are two places that you can find me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And yeah, thank you to everybody who's listening to us. I hope that this was useful. If you have any questions for Maria or I, please do either send them to me or pop them in the comments of whichever platform you are listening to this on. And we will be back next time with another false dichotomy, is the only thing that I can promise you. Thank you so much, Maria.